Out of all of the things that have happened this year, from faraway conflicts to ever-increasing political division, I did not foresee PewDiePie, of all people, deciding to show off not only the fact that he now uses Linux Mint as his daily driver, replacing his Windows system, but also the seemingly pretty cool rise he has going on. And I believe, in my opinion, that this is going to be a pivotal moment in the ever-increasing adoption rate of Linux-based operating systems. Of course, I'm not saying Windows is now sentenced to death, far from it, but what I am saying is that even if a micro percentage of, say, PewDiePie's audience decides to go through with making a Linux distro their daily driver, that's an audience of over 110 million people. And that's ignoring other people on YouTube who are undoubtedly going to make Linux known to their audiences as a result of his video in one way or another. That is no small number, and for a well-established content creator with over 100 million subscribers to dedicate an entire video to Linux, I think, is pretty unheard of. But before I get too carried away, is it time to get a little excited about the prospects of Linux becoming more and more mainstream as a result of these recent events? Well, let's get into it. Linux has arguably always suffered from not only a discoverability problem, but also optics. It's this hacker-esque, mysterious, command-line interface operating system that only seemingly cool 4chan hackermen people use. It has this appearance for the majority of people who even bother taking the time to research it. Even though it's technically the most used operating system globally, it's basically unknown to the average person, and to be honest, most people don't really care about it right now. But this dynamic between the common normie and Linux is at risk of being uprooted when someone like PewDiePie, with such a massive audience made up of people from all over the place in terms of their interests, casually showcases Linux Mint and makes it look not just usable as a daily operating system, but really cool. This does something no traditional promotional material could ever do, or at least hasn't done to an effective level, and that is to normalise not only the adoption of such an operating system, but to replace traditional operating systems like Windows and macOS altogether with it. And this at a time where the upcoming drop of support for Windows 10 Home Edition is beginning to get those normies a little spooked out. Will their PCs suddenly combust into flames if they refuse to update to Windows 11 any longer? Well, that's if their computer supports the requirements for Windows 11, but you can watch my previous video on the subject if you're interested, link in the description. This happy coincidence may entice more people than you think to switch over to Linux. I'd imagine whenever Microsoft shuts down support for one of their Windows versions, there is a slight influx in users going over to a Linux distro, but this time I think it's going to be a few more. For years, Linux as a whole has been fighting a two-front war, one against the all-encompassing supremacy of decades of Windows dominance, and another against the perception that your average NPC holds, that Linux is just too complicated. People in the know might just write off these normie NPCs, but without a wider level of adoption, the established proprietary programs and sketchy subscription closed source based organisations will continue to grow and dominate the playing field. But back to the point of your average Joe observing Linux as being too complicated, which sounds fair enough if you look at it from their view. There was a time, after all, when that was true, but that time is arguably now long gone. Distros like Linux Mint, Pop! OS, terrible distro, and Debian have matured to the point where the installation is easily done through a GUI, drivers just work most of the time, and the user's interface can feel more modern and cohesive than Windows 11. Not that high of a bar to reach, but by the by. Now here's where, in this case, PewDiePie's influence matters. Even if only 0.1% of his audience decides to try Linux after watching his video, that's still over 100,000 people, which is by no means a small amount. And this matters because it ties into something bigger. The type of person to recognise the failings of Windows are the same people who are getting tired of Windows as a whole, but not just tired of Windows, frustrated with it. Between Windows 11's nagging to constantly update, bloated pre-installed software, ads for Candy Crush in the start menu, and telemetry that's increasingly obsessive about everything you do on your system, more and more usually NPC-type users are starting to question whether the convenience of staying with Windows is worth it. Even on semi-decent hardware, Windows 11 often feels fat and slow, weighed down by random dodgy services running in the background that no one knows about, installed, or really wants. And that's where Linux, of course, shines through like a light in the darkness, especially the lightweight ones like Gentoo or a vanilla installation of Arch. When people experience the raw speed of a nicely riced, freshly installed and configured Linux-based system, as very nicely shown within PewDiePie's video oddly enough, it's hard to go back to the fat Windows operating system that desperately needs you to install a new version of the Xbox Game Bar. Now, if the same attention was to be brought to Linux, say 5 to 6 years ago, I don't believe it would have had the same potential to convert new users as it does today, and I think this is largely down to Valve's Proton. Thanks to the development of Proton from Valve and the direct endorsement of Linux-based gaming from such an important company, a huge amount of previously Windows-only video games now run smoothly on Linux. And they didn't just stop there. As you probably know, Valve's own Steam Deck runs on an Arch-based Linux OS, and that in and of itself has proven that gaming on Linux isn't just viable in the modern day, it's the future for a lot of people. PewDiePie even mentioned gaming works, quote, surprisingly well, which, coming from someone known for gaming content, at least he used to be, sends a strong message to those who buy PCs to game on, a very large portion of the PC market. I say all of this because I believe the gaming aspect of Linux is ultimately going to be a strong driver in the amount of users willing to switch over to it from Windows. The look and feel of distros like Mint, Debian, Fedora and Ubuntu has been sufficiently polished. Now the obstacle for your average PC pleb is software. The slight problem with some video game compatibility, notably some anti-cheats like Easy Anti-Cheat and Battle.eye, are being addressed, albeit slowly and not without pushback. Other pieces of software, however, still have a little ways further to go in order to make Linux truly appealing to most people. Tools like OBS, GIMP and Blender are all really good examples of open source projects getting better, and in some aspects are even comparable to Adobe's suite and other proprietary pieces of software like Autodesk Suite. And whilst open source alternatives are getting better with each release, not to mention the fact that they are free with no telemetry, mostly, looking at you Audacity, they still feel like alternatives for the most part and not replacements. And this is especially obvious in the professional world. But with all of that said, what does this all mean for the future? Will anything actually change? PewDiePie's Linux video isn't just a one-off. It's part of a broader pattern of people online with a little bit of clout giving established proprietary pieces of software and the companies that own and develop them a kick in the teeth. I mean, who thoroughly enjoys using Windows whilst installing the newest Windows Defender update before forking out $120 and their newborn child for a further month's rent of Adobe products? I love seeing the progression Linux and alternative software are having into becoming more mainstream, so I hope to see it continue. And with the next step for improved compatibility being select video game anti-cheats, I suspect it's going to be a little while before we see significant improvements, but a large part of that battle, I believe, will be down to Valve, and hopefully they're able to strong-arm anti-cheats to figuring out better ways to do their job without Ring Zero control. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video as much as I did making it. Subscribe to the channel and like the video if you really enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in my next video.